Good evening, everyone. My name is Councillor Macpherson. I'm chair of this committee. I'd like to welcome you all to Cambridge City Council Civic Affairs meeting taking place at 5:30 on Wednesday, the 8th of February 2023. And if I could ask those in the chamber to introduce themselves, that will be great. If we could just go from Councillor Davey.
Councillor Mike Davey, Petersfield.
Councillor Katie Thornborough, Petersfield.
Councillor Sam Carling, West Chesterton.
Mark Hodgson, Audit Partner, Ernst & Young.
Robert Pollock, Chief Executive.
Caroline Reber, Head of Finance.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Hawke has just arrived. Welcome. We have an apology from the Council's independent person, Rob Bennett, so he will not be joining us in person today, although we do have a statement from him later on to read out after, I think it's items 7 and 8. Officers will join us throughout the course of the meeting, and I'll introduce them at the start of relevant agenda items, or they may introduce themselves. Some officers will be online and some will be in the chamber. Copies of the agenda can be found on the City Council's website under committee meetings, minutes and agendas. It'd be useful if you can refer to pages and paragraph numbers within the agenda. When you're invited to address a meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. And when you've finished addressing the meeting, just make sure it's switched off again. Otherwise, it will feed off to each other. Please can those present at the Council Chamber note that, of course, everything on the desk, including laptop screens, may be broadcast at some point. The camera should follow the microphone being switched on. So councillors and officers are requested to wait just a couple of seconds to allow the camera to catch up with the microphones. Oh, just a word about the chat column, if you do have it open, that is to be used for no other purpose but for the meeting. It is not confidential or private and can be called upon, so just to remind you of that. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations anybody wishes to make now? And I will remind you that if not, that's fine. You can make them as we progress. I will consider there are none to declare at this moment. Minutes of previous meeting, everybody in possession thereof and happy? Lovely, then I will sign them at the required time. I don't believe we have any public questions, is that right?
That's correct.
No public questions today.
Councillor Bennett is joining us online.
Councillor Bennett, I'm sorry, that'll teach me to look at the screen as well as the chamber, won't it? Welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
That takes us very swiftly on to item number 5, officer delegated decisions. And that runs from page 21. Are there any comments on those pages at this moment? Okay. In that case, I'll carry on because item, unless you want to go through each one, item A, 5A, 5B, 5C, did you want to do that? Or should we just, we're all happy? Right, okay. So I'm going to say a couple of words on 5D on page 39, which is the delegated decision to agree special responsibility allowance of an additional £5,554. Pro rata of that is £1,600 for the applied to the Combined Authority Board Member and Deputy Mayor, Councillor Anna Smith, whilst covering the duties of the Mayor, Dr Nick Johnson of the Peterborough and Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. I think that my feeling on this, I've looked at this quite a bit, and I don't know what the committee feel, but I feel that this is a big job. It takes Councillor Smith 2 to 3 days every week. I don't think it was fully understood because this was new. If my memory serves me correctly, this is the first time this has ever happened anywhere in the country, I believe. So I think that it needs to be looked at again, and I would like officers to come back with a report and with a more fuller report for the work involved in this, because I think the combined authority were being very cautious in the amount that they did agree to. So I would like a report to come back to this, to the next committee, next Civic Affairs Committee, a more fuller report with the amount of information we now have that Councillor Smith, the role that she's fulfilling, the amount of work that's required, the amount of responsibility that's required from her, will now be more fully understood these months later. So I'd like to call for that report to come back. Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder if we could have something from the CPCA as to why they're not paying. If that would be feasible, because that would then understand why we think we should pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert, did anybody wish to speak on this? Councillor Hall.
Yeah, I mean, I had actually just the same point. I mean, I find it actually outrageous that the city council is now paying, for the replacement of Dr. Nick Johnson. And obviously we wish him well. Hopefully he'll be back in his job. I mean, I find it incomprehensible that there's no plan for this. This happens in every job. So I think we should, of course, Councillor Smith should be paid for the additional work and responsibility she's taking on, but it should not be the city council. I mean, unless that's the only solution in the short term. But I think the combined authority should simply pay the money back at some point.
I think that's sort of basically what I'm saying. The whole thing needs to be looked at again and be recompensed at a level that reflects the responsibility of the job, and then how that's going to happen. And I think, to be fair to everybody, it's not happened before, but there should have been a plan, there wasn't, and maybe we're going to be forging that forward where others haven't. Councillor Colney, did you wish to speak?
Yeah, I was just going to echo a lot of the comments that have already been raised and just say, if my maths is right, I think Councillor Smith's being paid less than a 15th of the mayoral salary, which is just completely appalling given the amount of extra work that she has taken on. And to be honest, if other combined authorities also are lacking a provision for this, perhaps this is something that needs to be looked at kind of a multi-combined authority, even a national level, and I wonder if there's any way that we can perhaps contact the relevant people about that.
Yeah, that's right. It opens up a whole new perspective, and that is exactly what I'm trying to do from here, to get it looked at, and not just for this particular job, but across the board. It needs looking at. Please.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think it has happened before in almost every other job. I think it is just completely, predictable that somewhere, at some point, somebody will get sick, or even worse, unfortunately, and that there should be a deputy and a contingency plan somehow. So it's obviously not our fault, it's the city council, but I think we should point this out and make sure that we are not paying somebody else's, for somebody else's negligence.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe the Chief Exec got a word to say. Am I right in saying it's the first time it's happened in this job?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that the frustration here is that combined authorities are relatively new institutions, and when the relevant statutory powers enabled by Parliament to create them were established, there wasn't provision made for a combined authority to provide a salary for a deputy in the event of the mayor falling ill or taking a leave of absence. And you're correct, Chair, that this, as far as we know, is the first instance. I think for the committee's benefit, it would be helpful just to put on record that we did seek advice from emergency advice from the independent review panel, and they reflected that there wasn't a mechanism to cover the additional allowance for the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Anna Smith. They did think it was an anomaly, and they did record that they would have preferred to have been more generous. They felt constrained by, as the City Council was funding this, by our own allowances. So I think we have spoken to government about it. I think you're right, Chair. Other councillors have made the point that this is a more system-wide issue that's come to light as a result of what's happened at the combined authority.
Mr. David.
Robert, did you say more generous? Does that mean that Councillor Smith has received an allowance? Because my understanding is she hasn't. And therefore, I think to pick up Councillor Hawke's point, in that in any other salaried job, which which I understand the mayoralty is, if the salaried person goes away, then the deputy or whoever picks up that responsibility is paid. And so therefore, I suppose what I'm just checking out, did the CPCA offer anything, Councillor Smith?
So the CPCA, under its statute that established it, its standing orders, can only pay a remunerated salary to the elected mayor. So there's no legal provision for them to pay a salary to Councillor Smith in her role acting up as mayor. What we did agree in place of that, almost as an emergency provision, given the time commitments that Councillor Smith was making to step into this role, was based on the allowances that the City Council currently provides for members that perform a role on the Combined Authority Board, and that was prorated as well. So our own independent remuneration panel looked at this at short order, and that was their advice. They felt they would have liked to have been more generous, but they had to follow our own benchmarks. They didn't feel able, particularly because the City Council was stepping in, to alter or go beyond our existing set of allowances. So it is something, Chair, that we could follow up and bring back at the next meeting on the 15th of May, if that's what members would like.
I think it's very important that we do that for all the reasons that members have said. Councillor Collins.
Very briefly, Robert, did you say we've contacted government about this? I'm just wondering if so, what they've said and kind of whether there's any commitment there that they're going to try and fix this loophole at a national level.
The Combined Authority contacted government as soon as they were aware of Mayor Dr. Nick's period of taking leave. And I think, so that they are aware of this kind of loophole in the way that combined authorities are set up. We do need to continue that conversation, and I think, as many of you have said tonight, it's a gap, and it's in any other workplace you wouldn't have this type of issue. So it might be something to be addressed nationally.
Councillor Thornborough.
So we could ask the combined authority to step up in the way that we're considering stepping up, yeah?
I think probably it's all of those things, all of the above, that I'm sort of asking the officers, or we're asking the officers to look into at the moment, and I think this will become a wider discussion. But certainly, I think sort of in two halves really, the position we've got now with the councillor involved, it doesn't really matter who it is, it's that position that we're looking at and the job that we're looking at and the responsibilities of that job and how that job should be remunerated now is one part of it. The next part of it, as I can see, is on the wider scale, is as Councillor Hawke rightly pointed out, why is there not a proper strategy? What would happen in the future? And there will be other mayors in the country this is going to happen to, and they're going to have a deputy. How are they going to handle it? Now, I know that we can't police the world, but we can certainly start to make noises and have some sort of strategy and report come back to us on those two fronts, and that really it should be recompensed really through the GCP. That's what I meant, combined authority. I'm sorry, got that on my mind too much, I think. Yeah, so I take your point. Combined authority is what I meant to say. Okay, so if we're agreed on that, everybody's happy with that. That's absolutely fine. Mr. Pollock, you happy with that? We'll come back with a report. Great. To the next meeting, we'll see where it takes us. Thank you for that, everyone. So that takes us a little less swiftly on to item number 6. And that report will be given by Debbie Simpson. I've seen her on the screen, and there she is. And Debbie joins us from afar. So can you hear us loud and clear, Debbie?
I can, but for some reason I've just gone into the dark, so hopefully you can see me.
Okay, that's fine. So this report is on page 41, And recommendations are on page 42, 2.1 and 2.3. So the officer will now make the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. This is the presentation of the draft pay policy report for 2023-24, and members of Civic Affairs may recall seeing this type of report before. It hopefully is recommended from Civic Affairs onto Council on the 2nd of March, and if the pay policy is approved, which is Appendix 1, then that would be published on the Council's website. So normally this report is an update on Appendix 1, updating ratios, pay awards that have happened, and any information that is in the report. But on this occasion, there are two additional elements. And the first one that I wanted to talk about was the senior pay review, which happens every 3 years. The last one was in 2019. It's looking at the salary levels for the chief exec post, directors, and heads of service, so the three most senior grades in Cambridge City's pay structure. To undertake the review, I've looked at data across 46 district and borough councils. Most of those chosen at random from published information on their websites, all looking at 2002 data. But we did make sure that in the sample we included some of the people that we compare to on a regular basis, like Oxford, like Norwich, and our neighbours. And included in the report in a number of places are graphs which look at the at 3.10, 313, 316 and 321. There are graphs which show the relative position of our posts of Chief Exec, Director and Head of Service compared to those 46 authorities. And it shows us at either 20th or 15 out of that 46 sample. The chart at 3.21 sort of brings all that together in one place. And where any of those authorities had a fourth level of assistant director, then you'll see that as a spot. But there were relatively few of those. We have a pay policy that says which has been around for some considerable time, that said that these posts at the top of the salary would look to benchmark at the median. And that's something that I think potentially we would need to review, given the high cost of living in the Cambridge area, and given the kind of posts that we have, that to benchmark ourselves to the median may not afford us in the longer term with the most attractive salaries to recruit and to retain. We have a 4-point salary for posts at Head of Service, Director and Chief Exec. And having looked at the data, the recommendation included in the report for the Chief Exec level post is that we take 1 point off the bottom and we add 1 point to the top. And in doing that, it's looking at an incremental value, so taking an additional increment onto the top. The same proposal in relation to directors, taking 1 increment off the bottom, adding 1 increment to the top. In relation to the assistant director post, it's a slightly different proposal, and I'll come on to that separately. So with chief exec and director, it's looking at the market, looking at what other authorities, district and boroughs are paying at this level, and recommendation that we move our pay position based on the 2022 comparisons. Obviously, we've had a pay award since then, and other authorities will have had a pay award since then, and pay awards will continue to apply. Just in relation to that, in the report I referred to at, 3.1, that the pay negotiations hadn't started at that point. They have now. You may have seen in the national news that the 3 trade unions have submitted a pay claim for 2023. There's also been claims submitted on behalf of chief execs and chief officers, and we use the national pay awards for the annual pay award increase. The employers won't meet until the 23rd of February, and it could be some time before that claim is settled. The claim is basically for 12.7%, so it's RPI plus 2%, and there are also claims for additional leave in the pay awards. The second part of the report relates to the potential salary for the assistant director grade. So the senior management review, which the chief exec is proposing, which went to S&R on the 30th of January and will go to council on the 2nd of March, is looking to delete the posts at head of service level and at director level and replace it with a new senior management structure. Included in that are director posts and this new post of assistant director. We're looking at 2 levels for that, an AD1 and an AD2. And included in the report is a table which shows the difference between what's expected at the AD1 level and the AD2 level. At the AD2 level, it will be on the senior manager, on the leadership team, and reporting directly to the chief executive. At the AD1 level, it will be controlling a group of services but reporting to a director. In order to put together a pay structure for that, I have looked at incremental values and where we are currently with heads of service and the significant gap that we have between the top of the head of service level and the bottom of the director level. And it was always intended that these roles would be looking, the salary would be looking at the gap between the head of service and the director level. So the proposals for 2 3-point scales, one at AD1 and one at AD2. The chief exec would determine posts which are at the AD2 level. All posts at this level, AD, director, chief exec, are subject to annual performance review. They would also attract annual pay awards if those are settled. The third element of the report is the update to Appendix 1 in relation to pay ratios, percentages for pension contributions, and the updating of the ratios. And hopefully you will note that Council previously agreed that our minimum annual hourly rate would increase to £11 on the 1st of April 2023. So I'm sorry that's quite a long introduction to the report. There's a lot of information in there. Hopefully it's been set out in a way which will enable you to kind of follow the structure and the logic of that. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for that, Deborah. Any questions, members? Councillor Hall.
Thank you. I agree. I mean, I think that all makes sense. I mean, I just think this focus on, I mean, mostly relying on the ranking of our salary bands with other councils. I mean, if that were the only criterion, it would basically be a race to the top. I mean, all councils compare each other to each other, and then obviously they would increase the salaries. So I think we would maybe need graphics like that also for the cost of living to see where Cambridge really stands with respect to the cost of living compared to the other councils. I mean, to have some grounding of these data, in the actual, costs or the factors that we are talking about here that should determine the salary range, and also maybe a bit more difficult, but is there a way to assess the competitiveness of the job here in Cambridge? I mean, for example, it seems that at least last time we found a suitable candidate for these jobs. So is there a way to say how urgent is it? I mean, how big a factor is this salary band in order to attract the right or suitable candidates for the job? I mean, I work in academia, so we ask ourselves these questions all the time. Sometimes we can't fill certain positions and we think it's the money. At the same time, we sometimes get people who even accept salary cuts to come to some good positions here in Cambridge because other things benefit them. So yeah, I just wonder whether, again, on top of these graphics, which are very informative, the ranking of the councils with respect to salary bands, we could also get a ranking of those councils with respect to cost of living and some idea of the competitiveness of this job and how this should be translated into money, basically. Thank you.
Did you want to respond now, Deborah, or should we take the next question?
I think it would be helpful if we took a group of questions.
Yeah, that's what I'll normally do, just checking with you. Councillor Bennett, you're next in that case.
Thank you. I've had the advantage of having reviewed this with Deborah already, and I'm very satisfied with the methodology and the approach. I can see that this has been done conscientiously in line with best practice. The only caveat I would make is that we are now living in a much more uncertain world with high inflation, and I wondered what ability we had to make any in-year changes, or monitor whether our pay levels are falling below levels at which we can recruit. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any more questions? Councillor Davies.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Bennett, I've had the opportunity to have a look at this paper in advance, so I've come forewarned. I really welcome the paper, so thank you to Deborah for putting this forward. I suppose two comments really, not dissimilar to Councillor Hawke's, the first one. I do worry that we are slightly underpaying what our staff should be having. And I'm struck by, I think it's paragraph, the chief exec's pay, that, is it 312? It seems to be we're on a par with East Cambridgeshire. And whilst I don't wish to decry the complexity of East Cambridgeshire, I think Cambridge is in a slightly different position to that. I just wonder if we're pitching the salary correctly. And certainly to be lower than Huntingdonshire feels slightly odd. The second point is, again, to echo Councillor Bennett. We're going through a transformation programme, and so I just wonder if, when the posts are established or in place as part of the management review, whether there is scope to undertake a fuller review, particularly about looking at the various different scales of the posts that are currently proposed to be at an assistant director and director level. Thank you, Deborah.
Questions? Okay, that's all we have, Deborah. So back to you.
I think in relation to the competitiveness of these posts, when we're recruiting at this level, Chief Exec, Director or Head of Service, we're generally looking at national recruitment. If we're trying to recruit someone from a lower cost area, and by that I mean house price most often, we need to be offering a salary which is going to offer some kind of edge. I mean, it goes without saying that we have great jobs, we're a great city, we're an attractive employer from that point of view. But at the end of the day, people need to be able to afford to move to our jobs. So from that point of view, we need to be able to be attractive from a salary comparison point of view, not just in terms of the work and the opportunity that we offer. We are competing with neighbours who offer very similar or higher salary jobs to us. There are a number of jobs at this level that are on the market at any given point. If we're in a place where we need to advertise our roles, then we can't just, in my opinion, rely on the fact that we're Cambridge and we offer a fantastic opportunity. People still need to be able to afford to work for us, and if needs be, to move to the area and to relocate. Thank you for the comments on the methodology and the briefings, and hopefully they were helpful to us. If, as a result of the senior management review, we find ourselves in a position where we are recruiting to some of these posts externally and nationally, we will have the opportunity to see very clearly whether our jobs are attractive. And I've said in the report that we need to monitor it. We need to keep an eye on this and not wait potentially for the next 3-year review, and we did this with the chief exec's level post when we were advertising. We had hoped to recruit within the salary range that we had at the time, but members of Civic Affairs, because there was a report around about that time, had asked that if we did struggle with the recruitment, that we would step out of cycle and look at the salary for a chief exec and potentially bring that back. I think the other thing just to mention is this is not about the salaries of individuals. This is about the salary range for the roles, and particularly in relation to the ADs and the directors. These will be new posts and the salaries will be relating to those posts at that level. And there's a comment in relation to the chief exec salary in the report. I'm hoping that answers the questions, but if it hasn't, then please come back.
Councillor Thorne.
I do have concerns that we're sort of in the middle of the range, and considering the pressures on Cambridge and the pressures on living in Cambridge are not going to ease, they are going to increase as far as the cost of living in Cambridge, I think. And I actually do feel that in an ideal world over the next few years, as you've said, that we need to review this more frequently than every 3 years to ensure that, well, I would feel that we should be not in, more towards the top quarter rather than in the middle, really. About that, but it would be, I think it should be something that's considered very carefully over the next few years.
Councillor Hope.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't disagree with anything that you've said about the objectives there. And I'm pretty sure this has been done very, very thoroughly, also as Councillor Bennett said. I mean, I'm just wondering if this could be more explicit, the criteria and the decision process more explicit in these in this document. And also, I think it's related to what Councillor Thornborough said. I mean, if Cambridge ranks first in terms of house prices or cost of living on various metrics, then maybe we should not be number 10 with respect to the salary band, but number 1 there too. So I just wonder whether there is a way of addressing this with data and really have a proper, quantitative way of making this decision. Yeah, thank you.
Chief Exec.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's important to recognise that the advice that Deborah's setting out is also linked to the senior management review. So we're in our budget proposals that you will consider separately, we've assumed that you would be satisfied with these proposals, and so that they are kind of baked into some of our forward savings. So I think you've made some really compelling points about the attractiveness of the offer in Cambridge, and also whether we're competitive. I think we also need to always consider value for money in the bottom line. And there may be alternatives to the pay band, which can help, particularly if we're recruiting on the open market and we're incentivising people to come to Cambridge. And that could be a moving allowance, looking again at that. But I think you're right, and Deborah's right, that we're going to go through a transition. Let's get some more data and evidence. And I think Councillor Hawke has made a good point about the cost of living in Cambridge and how we factor that into the judgments we come to on pay. You will come on and consider the audit report later, and I think we found that recruiting for other posts, maybe more junior posts, has been more of a challenge. So I think we need to look at it in the round. So Deborah's right to say, let's keep it under review, but we also need to look at all of our pay scales in the round and not, prioritise senior pay. I think that sends the wrong signal.
I wouldn't disagree, Robert. I don't think that's quite what we're saying. I think it's about pitching, and I hear what Deborah said about this is about increases to pay bands, but we're the best in the world. It's a good example for you to be being paid less than the chief executive of Waveney District Council. Doesn't make sense to me, and I'm not knocking Waveney because I know they have complexities, but that's in rural Suffolk, in an area whereby house prices are very low. And it's about attracting really high quality staff. And I think as part of this review, the transformation, I think all I get the sense of that we're saying is that we need to come back to this and look at it again. And then we can look at the pay, not just of the chief exec, but of all levels within the organisation. Because again, it's about how we are enabling people to come to the city and to work for what we all believe is a very high quality local authority. And it's just about how that balance is done. So this is, again, I come back to my earlier comments. I think this is a really good paper, I'm really supportive of it, but there's something that we need to take forward, I think, as a result. Does that make sense, I hope?
Okay, so just to get it clear in my head there, we do have the recommendations 2.1 to 2.3. Did we want to take them as they are, or did you wish to consider bringing a further report back at the risk of giving the officers more work in another year's time? Is that what you were asking? I'm just not clear whether you were
Sorry.
whether you were.
No, I think that this recommendation, these are fine, but we're saying don't leave it another 3 years. Maybe review this again and with the evidence next year. And
Yeah, that's sort of what I was intimating. Are we going to ask for a further review in a year's time in that case then, as part of these recommendations?
For me, it depends how much time. I'm going to be advised by Deborah and Robert about how much time you think it requires the management review to bed in.
I'm just trying to work out where we should go with this before accepting recommendations as to rather than just leave it and say, we'll accept those and then walk away. So if we come to some sort of arrangement, or maybe we have to just revisit the subject, maybe not call for a whole new report, but revisit the subject perhaps at the next Civic Affairs to say what would the timescale be, what would be feasible, what is workable, and maybe we could have a small item, a short discussion at the next Civic Affairs when the officers have had time to sort of think about that. Robert?
Sorry, Chair. Councillor Bennett has a hand up. Maybe she should go before me.
Yeah, that's fine. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that I was only asking to confirm that Deborah had the power to do an ad hoc review if one was needed, rather than suggesting that a further one be timetabled in. Because it's quite a big commitment in terms of Deborah's time. And I feel that, you know, we should be able to see whether such a report is needed and take a decision on an ad hoc basis, in which case I don't think the recommendations need to change. I would also like to say that although I'm attending in a non-voting capacity, I would be happy to vote for the recommendations as they stand. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think it's a very sensible suggestion, and you know more about the money side of life than I do, so that was a good suggestion. How do members feel about that? Last word, Chief Exec?
Always have the last word, Chair. If members are comfortable, I think taking an ad hoc approach would be better, because we are all under significant resourcing pressures. And Councillor Davies writes, the review will take time to bed in. And as the executive with responsibility for HR and transformation, I think we could keep you briefed and up to date, and maybe Deborah could take a view about the appropriate timing of review. It did take a lot to find all this information. It's not readily available, unfortunately. And, you know, I think Deborah's also got her hand up, so she may want to conclude.
And that was exactly my point, really, the concern about the amount of work. But at least we've aired it, and we've got some sort of plan in mind. And of course, so the last word will, in fact, go to Deborah then.
Thank you. I think that the question for me is recognising that we need to do something now, and then to do a further review. I mean, the pay policy comes back to Civic Affairs every January-February cycle. It wouldn't be totally unusual for you to ask me to bring something back with the next pay policy review. So that would be looking at the January cycle. It would also mean that the senior management review would have an opportunity to bed in, and if we find ourselves in a position where we're looking at any external appointments, we would have the data from that review that would help support it. So I think from a personal point of view, I think it would be helpful to know whether you want to accept the recommendations for the changes that are proposed in the report. But I would be happy to support a further review in light of the senior management review and additional data, as Councillor Help has asked for a further review. The other factor is this was based on 2022 data. We're doing our pay policy now and we will publish it. Everybody else will be doing the same thing in the same cycle because we've got a requirement to do that. So in order to gather the relevant and most up-to-date data, really I need to be able to look at stuff in kind of April, May when people are publishing their pay policies again. So just in relation to timing, if it is possible to look at this for the next pay policy, but to do something now, I think is probably the ask I have.
Okay, Deborah, I can see what the members' feelings are. I think that's a really good idea. I think we'll take your offer on that and have another look at it for next year's cycle in January. But I think for the recommendations today, I think everybody said what they needed to say at 2.1, 2.3. Members, are we happy to take those on block or would you like to one at a time? All those in favour of those recommendations? Okay, we're done. Thank you very much for that, Debbie. Deborah, sorry to take a bit of time on that, but I think it was worth it because we moved it a little bit further forward. So thank you for that. Okay, thank you, everyone. That takes us to agenda item 7, External Auditors Annual Report for year ending 31st of March 2022. I believe Mark Hodgson is here from Ernst & Young and will introduce his item. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So, really pleasing to be here with our annual report because it confirms that we've concluded the audit, and as you'll see from the paper, we issued our audit opinion on the 30th of November, following presenting to you earlier that month, which puts you in a very small cohort of audited bodies who were able to get their accounts audited by the 30th of November publication deadline. So this report is meant to be more public-facing than a detailed auditor's report with the results of the audit. On that basis, there are no new messages which you wouldn't have seen previously, and I think page 70 is really the key page of your pack. It just summarises all the positive messages from the audit, an unqualified audit opinion, no matters to raise in relation to going concern, no matters to raise in relation to value for money arrangements of the council, and then we have included, and the element which is new is pages 74 and 75, which is the commentary which updates those arrangements which you have in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of your resources. And back to page 70, the annual governance statement was consistent with our knowledge and we didn't have any reason to use any of our auditor powers. I won't say any more because it's a relatively short report which just encapsulates a lot of the messages and detail that you've seen before, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. As you see, the recommendations are on the same page at 2.1. Are there any questions? Councillor Davey.
I've got a comment, if that's okay. For my sins, I went to the LGA finance meeting about a fortnight ago, 3 weeks ago, and it would be fair to say I felt rather smug given the comments and conversations made by other authorities. And so my comment is to offer my gratitude and thanks to Caroline and her team and to Mark and his team for the work that's been undertaken to get this audit across the board ahead of the time and in place in a position where we are that other authorities across the country are not. So it's about gratitude. So thank you very much. Thank you.
You stole my thunder. Any questions? Oh, Councillor Bennett, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm following Councillor Davies' example. This is more of a comment than a question. I also would like to thank the officers and the auditors, and also to thank the officers for the work they're doing this year on merging our general fund and housing revenue account fund budgeting to enable us to go smoothly in future. It's a huge task, and I'm very grateful that I'm not doing it. One bit of report I wanted to comment on is page 8 in the value for money section, and it's just a very brief comment, which is the final outturn on the general fund being a surplus of 8.9 million compared to the budgeted deficit of 5.4 million. And I just wanted to comment that this doesn't mean to say that the accounts are overcautious or that we can really snack off on looking for savings. And the reason for this is that there are two items particularly that are commented on: the net underspend on services of 3.5 million and the 2.1 of capital costs underspent. And you'll notice that the auditor's commentary suggests that the capital fund savings are timing differences. They are things that we still have to spend money on, but we'll be spending them in later years when costs have increased. So this is a timing difference that we would be expecting to reverse. It does not mean that we're looking for fewer savings. Rather, it means reverse. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Just for clarity, the page number that Councillor Bennett was referring to is page 74 of the report, second paragraph down, just in case, because there's some small numbers. I think that was page 8 was the smaller numbers that the councillor was referring to. So everybody got that? Lovely, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that you found the right page. That was it. Any other comments? Councillor Davey.
Yeah, forgive me. I think I'm never quite sure if I should be declaring interest or not, but I am a board member of KIP, and of course they're referred to within the accounts process.
Okay, thank you for that. That will be noted. And we have, finally, before we take a vote on the recommendations, I know it's just a note, but it's nice to have that vote. We have a statement from the independent person who couldn't be with us today. So this is from Rob Bennett.
To say well done to the finance team and the external auditors for working together to deliver the audit completion ahead of the 30th November 2022. The conclusions in the auditor's annual report are all positive and reflect very well on the work of councillors and officers. End of statement.
Thank you for that. So some nice comments all the way around and well deserved. So can I just ask for a show of hands on recommendation of 2.1, please? I know we're just noting, but there was a lot of work there and it doesn't take much. Okay. Thank you very much. On we go. Item 8 on page 85. The recommendations are on page 85 at 2.1 to 2.3. And could I please ask the Deputy Head of Finance, Neil, to introduce this item, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. So this is a standard report which is brought to this committee at this point in the year. Its purpose is to familiarise members with matters that are relevant to the production of the upcoming statement of accounts. I will refer to the pages in your agenda packs this evening when presenting the report. Now, paragraph 3.1 rather pleasingly notes that there are not any significant changes in the underlying accounting standards and regulations which will underpin the production of the 22-23 statement of accounts. Section 3 also remarks on the timetable that we are working to this year as far as production of the financial statements, and it reaffirms the points that Mark Hodgson from EY has just made regarding the timetable we were able to adhere to last time around. The timetable for producing this year's accounts will undoubtedly be tight, but I'm pleased to report that plans are in place to adhere to that timetable, and we will continue to work with colleagues from EY to understand their timetable as far as work on the statements is concerned after they have been published in draft. One of the things that we have done as part of this report in previous years is not only to talk about changes that will affect the upcoming accounts for that financial year, but also to identify other changes that are in the pipeline. Within section 6 of this report, from page 92, I have provided some commentary on potential changes that were effectively notified to you in previous years which have now either been put on hold or deferred. I'm happy to take questions on the detail, but hopefully that section of the report just provides you with a useful update. Now, when it comes to producing the accounts, we're required to make a fresh assessment each year of whether there are any significant judgments which we are making as officers which relate to the application of accounting policies within the statements. Our initial assessment this year is that there is still just one area where we believe we are making a significant judgment in respect of how we account for items of account and apply our accounting policies. This relates to the continuing uncertainty about funding levels in local government and the way in which this links with the valuation of assets, particularly those assets which are used for the purpose of service delivery within the council. Section 5 of this report, which starts on page 88, covers the accounting concept of estimation uncertainty. In simple terms, this is a requirement that we make disclosures in the accounts about those elements of the statements where there is an element of uncertainty about the amount disclosed and the possibility that that amount may change by a material amount over the following 12 months, i.e. when the next set of accounts is produced. This, again, is an annual assessment which we're required to make as an accountant. Now, I think it's worth noting that the external environment which the council is operating in has continued to change. We are obviously recovering from COVID, but we deal with some challenging economic circumstances at the moment. Those circumstances interact in a variety of different ways with balances that are disclosed in the accounts. And we've provided some commentary within this report, which actually goes through each of the areas where we consider estimation uncertainty to exist. The areas themselves are 4 in number and are consistent with those disclosed in previous years, and I think it's fair to say consistent with those which you would see in the majority of local authority financial statements. I'm happy to take any questions you may have on any of the areas that are disclosed. Finally, the recommendations, as the Chair has just explained, are set out at the start of the report. They ask that you note the content of this report, and they also give you the opportunity, if you wish, members, to provide feedback on the format of the accounts, which was obviously streamlined considerably as part of the work that my predecessor undertook to produce the 21-22 statements.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. Any questions, members? Councillor Davey.
Thank you very much, Neil, for your presentation. A couple of questions. One specifically about future, I think, and about whether or not we will be in future having to account for the impact upon carbon zero policies that we adopt as a council, specifically around the impact on assets for retrofitting our homes, swimming pools, etc. And you refer to those assets in section 5, and I just wondered if there's any more detail you could give, because I suspect that in due course this may become an increasing area of concern to us as a council. Thank you, Neil.
I think that's an interesting area, both in terms of the work that CIPFAR are doing around sustainability and some of the kind of public reporting on the progress that authorities are or are not making. But I think the other aspect of it is actually buildings where there is going to be significant work required to bring them up to whatever level is required by legislation. That is obviously going to have an impact in terms of the valuation of that asset, since the cost of the improvements are, have not yet been built. It needs to be built into the valuation as the cost that any potential purchaser would need to take on in potentially a relatively short period of time, depending on the nature of the building and, say, the extent of the work required. Hopefully that helps. So I think there's kind of two separate angles. One is our responsibilities as a public body and what we might be required to provide in terms of information in the public domain in accordance with government policy, and the other is the extent to which valuations will need to take account of the effectively the deficit within the fabric of a building if it's got significant work required to bring it up to the necessary standards within a short time frame.
Neil, I think, well, I congratulate you because you read my mind, because the last bit that was the bit that I was intrigued about is if we're going to have to take account of the financial liabilities that we'll be required as an authority to take to actually meet those targets. But also, I think there's also an implication for me about central government's responsibility and what they need to be doing to address, I mean, in Cambridge, we have a an idea just among the homes that we have, how much, and the assets that we have, how much that's going to cost. But if you then multiply that by the number of local authorities there are across the country, there's also a national picture that needs to be addressed. I am aware that the LGA and CIFRA are looking at this, but I think it's something just, again, I just wonder if we need to keep a weather eye on this for the future. But thank you, Neil, for your answer. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So in that case then, the recommendations are 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. Before we go to that, we have a statement to be, again, read out from Rob Bennett. Thank you.
Item 8 is a very clear report. The area that I would keep under closest review is that the value of investment properties, given that uncertain economic climate that we are in. End of statement.
Any comments on Rob's statement? No? You sort of said that. Yeah, no, please, Councillor Davey, please, that's why we're here.
I was going to ask, is there any, oddly enough, on the back of that, is there therefore any clarity, greater clarity from central government about the investor yield rules?
You want to respond
There
to that,
hasn't been anything further. Sorry, Caroline. There hasn't been anything further that I've been made aware of on top of the information that was published by Treasury previously.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So it is just a note, but show of hands would be nice. Everybody's seen it and understood it. Thank you very much.
Here, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry?
And there is a vote.
Yeah, oh, yes, that's what I said. So we've just done that. Okay, thank you.
Sorry to do this. Could you do it again?
Oh, yeah, certainly we
After
could.
that,
Yes, yes, certainly.
That's unanimous, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In that case, that takes us to item 9. And item 9 is on page 95. And if we could ask the Deputy Electoral Registration Officer, Vicky Jenner, to introduce this item, that would be lovely. Thank you. You're on mute, Vicky.
Sorry, apologies, I leant on the button. Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. This report asks the committee to use its delegated powers from the council to formally appoint a deputy electoral registration officer for the city. The chief executive is the electoral registration officer, but unlike the returning officer, there are no formal powers in legislation that allow the ERO to appoint deputies. That has to be done through either the council or, in this case, Civic Affairs with those delegated powers. The Elections Act 22 brings in some new responsibilities on the electoral registration officer. The one that has caused us to bring this report to you is that the free voter identification, the voter authority certificates that we will be required to issue close to polling day are required to be hand signed in wet ink by the ERO. And of course, we think that it would be far more practicable if that could be carried out by a deputy who would be available in person, meaning that that function could be carried out effectively, efficiently, without any delay, obviously, to the voter receiving their voter ID. There are other things in legislation that a deputy would be able to undertake. One of those is a registration hearing. These are few and far between. We've only had one in 9 years. And I think that's why this particular request hasn't been brought to you. But as I say, the Elections Act now makes this a more urgent need. So the recommendations are for the committee to actually pass on the power for the ERO themselves to make the appointment of deputies, to vary those appointments as and when needed. And if that is agreeable for the committee, then the ERO will be minded to appoint the electoral services manager into the appointment of the deputy. Happy to take any questions.
We're all still itching to make a comment, though.
Well, yeah, please, yeah, please do. So who's going to comment first? I've got one as well, but we'll wait. Councillor Dave.
Are we able to invoice the government for this requirement? Facetious remark, apologies.
Sorry, we lost you for a moment there, Vicky. I don't know if you lost us.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we picked you up again. So if Councillor David would just like to ask that question again.
No,
We
it
just
was,
lost
it was
connection.
facetious and unnecessary. My apologies, Chair, for
Oh, I
taking...
don't know. It's worth a try.
There's no remuneration for the appointment of a deputy RO.
So, David, there has been some new burdens funding for these changes. I think you're questioning whether that's enough, and we won't know until we've gone through a cycle.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Vicky.
I just have one question, really, but at 2.1, the recommendations, the power to appoint one or more deputies. So what would or more mean?
Thank you, Chair. This would just be the ability to appoint deputies if the electoral services manager became unavailable, or if there were other provisions that come in following the Elections Act that means one would not be enough.
It might be helpful for members to be aware that also as the returning officer, I already have the delegated authority to appoint deputy returning officers. So generally at elections, there are three, and that's partly just for a contingency basis, so everything can run smoothly. In this instance, the way that I think our constitution works is that though I'm the electoral returning officer, the power to appoint a deputy resides with this committee. And I think as Vicky's hinting here, you know, one may be enough. We'll have to wait and see. But if in future we need, for whatever reason, to appoint someone temporarily or on an ongoing basis, it would save coming back to the committee. But if you felt you wanted to retain that oversight, we're very happy to come back to the committee.
Councillor Thornberg, sorry, I just caught your eye as I started to speak. Otherwise, I'd let you speak
That's
first.
okay, Chair. Yes, I really appreciate what the council are doing about this, because we have great concerns about the whole voter ID requirement, and that even if we work hard to ensure people, our residents, know about this, there may be a big rush at the end, but we really do want all of our residents signing up where necessary for these the free voter ID. So putting this in place now and thinking about contingencies nearer the date is wise.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you for that, Vicky. So I'll just ask the members to vote on those recommendations at 2.1 and 2.2, both together. Everybody happy? Okay, thank you for that. I guess Councillor Davies voting.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vicky. So that takes us to item 10 on page 99, and the recommendation is on that page at 2.1 and 2.2. Gary, oh yes, I can see you now, Gary. So you are receiving us and ready to go.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. This is a report in response to a unanimous motion that was passed by the Council back in October 2021 to create a leave policy for councillors. The proposal in front of you has taken on board some examples from other local authorities that have already introduced leave policies, as well as the Local Government Association Labour Group's draft policy. So what I've done is I've looked at councils across the country that have got these policies already in place and taken the best bits from councils run by Labour, Liberal Democrat, Green and Conservative, and I've shared this draft with group leads from the three groups on the council, and that was done in the late autumn. I had positive comments back from councillors. Councillor Katie Pora, in particular, was very helpful in developing this draft. I hope members feel that it fits the bill from the unanimous motion passed in October 2021. And I think it's quite a progressive approach. Like all policies, when you introduce them, it'd be wise to review it after maybe a couple of years to see whether or not it is working for councillors. The policy is attached to the cover report and is fairly self-explanatory. It's deliberately broad in its scope. It's not trying to be prescriptive at stating when leave can be taken for what circumstances. And that's deliberate to enable a councillor to have the freedom to ask for the leave period without feeling that they have to tick a particular box in terms of what the reason for the leave should be. The relationship between the individual councillor and the group leader or the chief executive, depending on if they're not members of a group, I think is important. And I think it's something that will only work if it's embraced and supported by groups on the council, which I have no reason to believe that that isn't the case for Cambridge City Council. And lastly, in keeping with some of the suggestions that the independent remuneration panel put in being a family-friendly authority, there's a small recommendation in to suggest that we allow infant feeding to take place in meetings were a councillor in a position that they needed to do that in the future. So I think it's just a starting point in terms of our progression in enabling councillors to, you know, encouraging a wider selection of councillors in the future and something to build on. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thornborough.
I was just wondering about where it says this council resolves the following. Number 2 says to ensure that councillors with children and other caring commitments are supported as appropriate. Is it just absolutely clear that this is this applies to councillors without children who might have caring commitments? The only thing it says that not all councillors have are parents, but they may certainly have caring commitments for older relatives, or even not necessarily older relatives, but it may be other family members. So they're not parents, but they have major caring duties.
Sorry, did you want me to take all the questions and then respond after them, or do you want to do them one at
Yeah,
a time?
that's fine, Chair.
We
I'll
normally
take.
do them all, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got Councillor Carling, Councillor Hawke and Councillor Bennett. So Councillor Carling, it's yours. Oh, and Councillor Davey as well, so a full house.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm completely supportive of this. I think it's brilliant in Cambridge that we have one of the most diverse bases of councils in the country, but we can't get complacent. It's good to keep kind of bringing in initiatives and policies to help us keep that. On the last page, I had a question about the section about councillors' allowances, specifically paragraph 6.2, which says where a replacement is appointed to cover the period of absence, that councillor shall receive an SRA on a pro rata basis for the period of the temporary appointment. Now, as I understand it, that's intended to cover when somebody goes on leave who holds a position of special responsibility, you know, an executive councillor or something. It's not intended to perhaps cover if somebody goes on leave. It's not intended to cover their basic allowance. And I wonder if perhaps we should add some kind of clarification in there that, you know, covering for somebody's basic kind of ward work and such like perhaps isn't something we should be giving an SRA for. I'm not sure what the intention is, but it would be good to clarify that.
Thank you. I actually don't have a question, but also on behalf of my group, I mean, I would just like to say that we all welcome this. I mean, it's probably highly overdue. I think I would also like to point out, I think it's also, I would also like to encourage every group leader to make sure that if people within their group go on leave for whatever reason, that they come back to the position at the same level of responsibility as before. Finally, I think the motion back then also contained something about potentially allowing online voting in council meetings. So I think we should also keep that in mind, that could be an option to make it easier for people with caring responsibilities to participate, in democratic decision-making. Thank you very much.
Councillor Bennett, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise, I do welcome this, but I think it's very much a first step. We said that we're going to write to the government and ask for more flexibility on remote and hybrid working. I know that various people have asked for that before without any success. I do hope that there might be some positive movement at some point. However, I would say that there are other barriers to working as a counsellor when you have caring responsibilities, whether they're for children or for older parents. And some of these are hidden and are in the way that we work together. And I would like to see us taking some action as a cross-party basis to ensure that we root out and remove these hidden barriers where we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Councillor Davey.
Yeah, question for Gary. I think by implication, I know the answer, but just to confirm, presumably conversations were held with the three group leaders to agree the policy.
Those are the questions I've got here, Gary, but when you're done, because I haven't actually read this statement, but I know Councillor Pora has given us a statement to read out, but I don't think there's a question in there. So I think it's just a statement. So I think you're okay to respond now. We'll read the statement after you answer those questions, if that makes sense to you, Gary.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, in answer to Councillor Thornborough's question about carers, I was trying to look at the draft policy. It applies to councillors who have caring commitments, Councillor Thornborough. So I'm not the policy isn't pointing out specifically parental responsibility. It's deliberately wide to incorporate any sort of caring responsibilities that a member might find themselves in. So, and that's based on, looking at how other councils who've already got these policies in place. And what I should have said when I introduced it is we're still in the minority, even though, there's about 360 councils. My last count, there was about 55 that had these sorts of policies in place. So, councils are learning as we go along. But no, in answer to your question, it's not specifically about members who might have infants, babies, maternity kind of stuff. Councillor Carling, pro rata special responsibility allowance. Yes, that is for someone who we have. Say, for example, an executive councillor has a period of absence. Someone from the ruling group steps in for that person for a period of, 3 months, 4 months, something like that. Then pro rata, they will receive a special responsibility allowance that executive councillor is in receipt of. The executive councillor who has the leave is still receiving the special responsibility allowance as well. So yes, it wouldn't be covering things as part of the basic allowance, ward work, things like that. But I can, by all means, what I think I'll do is I'll think about how after this meeting, and if it's approved, I will be sending it out to all councillors to promote this as a new thing, and then also we'll be making sure that we walk newly inducted councillors through this so that they are aware of this new policy. Councillor Houck, you mentioned online voting, and there's continuous discussion with central government about embracing some of the advantages that we found ways of working with the pandemic. The only thing that was suggested at the city council level is whether or not, like in the House of Commons, you could consider a situation of pairing where you need to be absent from a meeting and you have an arrangement with the other groups that someone else doesn't turn up for that particular meeting. I'm not sure how far those conversations have happened between groups, but yes, there's certainly an ongoing discussion at the national level about how can we expedite the national government into thinking about allowing some form of online participation and voting, which touches on Councillor Bennett's question about remote and hybrid. It's learning those lessons. Just before the pandemic, the government was starting to think about those authorities in the country that had a large geographical area, and starting to have a conversation about, shall we allow some form of online voting? And then the pandemic hit and we all had to do it. I don't know where they are in terms of, in a sense of a priority on that. I know it's important for us, and I think all we can do is keep joining the national pressure through Association of Democratic Service Officers and the Local Government Association to try and encourage that to be brought forward. Councillor Davey, in answer to group leaders, Councillor Smith nominated Councillor Healy, but I made sure I copied Councillor Smith and Councillor Healy in all the correspondence. And like I say, the draft was produced and available to nominated councillors in the mid-autumn of last year. Hope that answers all everyone's questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, Gary. So if I can just ask for Councillor Pora's statement to be read to the members, that would be great. Unfortunately, Councillor Pora couldn't make today's meeting, and she said she would try to make it online, but if she couldn't, and she's not been able to, I agreed to and saw no problem with just reading her statement out, as she's done so much work on this, so I hope everybody was okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to speak as the Lib Dem lead on the development of this important policy, and apology that I cannot join you in person tonight. I just wanted to add my support for this paper and welcome the cross-party approach, and in particular to thank Gary Clift for all his work on this, incorporating the changes I had suggested and for his careful analysis of all the different policies in the UK from a range of councils under different political control. I believe that it is vital that we adopt this as Cambridge City Council. It is currently unfair that a councillor with legitimate maternity, paternity, or paternal leave requirement has no means of recording this. And I'm very pleased that we have also been able to include carers and those on long-term sick leave, bereavement leave, or compassionate leave. This helps us become a more inclusive council, leading by example, and to support everyone to serve their residents in our city. I also wanted to remind Civic Affairs and the wider council of our existing commitment to continue to raise the issue of proxy voting at local government level, currently only permitted in Parliament, but not here. I hope that we will continue to pursue this via the Local Government Association and any other means. This would further improve inclusivity, and I appreciate that this cannot be covered by the policy today, as it's a matter for national legislative change and outside our control at City Council level. Finally, I wanted to note that I would hope that all group leaders would commit to ensuring that any councillors who do take leave under this policy are always welcomed back to the same level of responsibility as when they took leave, and that they would always be an assumption that those returning should continue with the same roles. I know that the Lib Dem group leader has already committed to this, and I am sure that other group leaders will be keen to join us in doing so too. So I'd urge Civic Affairs to support this paper, and thank you for taking the time to read out my speech this evening. End of statement.
Thank you for that, Chris. Anything to add to that, Gary, before we go to the vote?
No, thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Everybody in favour of the recommendations, please show.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes the business of this meeting today. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.